team was one of the things to consider was how do we move forward in this interim process? So in that discovery, in that conversation, we found out about IPM, and we contacted that organization in October about a year ago. The recommendation was made to use IPM, and the congregation approved Pastor Jim Fleming in March of 24. So however many months ago that is. But that was a process, lots of discussion, prayer, and discernment during that. I'm so thankful for that process. One of the first things that Pastor Jim did when he was here was change the structure of that transition team a bit. And then kick us off on this IPM roadmap that he showed on the screen. You'll see it here in a second. But one of the phrases that I remember stating up here before was, we're going through what we call an intentional interim process. Right? We're going to use this time between pastors to be use it on purpose. What do we need to be as a church? How can we set ourselves up to be effective in ministry going forward? So an intentional interim process. So this 5-stage IPM roadmap is something that Jim shared with us, and we'll see it here in a second. At our last In the Know meeting, which was on 7/28, so July 28th, we shared that we were nearing completion of phase 1 of that project, that process. And today, we're really talking about now that we're almost to the end of phase 2, where are we going? So here's the sheet, here's the diagram of the process. If you guys can't see it, I'm in your way, I'll move over here. We're on track, and the summer we talked about connecting with people, assessing our church health, and if you look here in October, that is what we've been doing. That is the work that's been done. So we talk about connecting with people. This really represents a lot of that interview process that the Transition Council engaged with. Over 200 interviews, we'll talk more about that in a second. And then this time of assessing that information is what we're talking about today. Really, the work that comes from this is going to be to facilitate action and leading the strategic planning. That's the type of stuff that's coming next as we address the past and embrace the future. But that's the marker where we're at today. So we're on pace, doing the things that we need to do. It does take a bit of time, but we feel like we're making the right progress. So here he goes. I want to talk about the things that have been done to help inform the next steps that you're going to see today. And you guys have seen all this. It shouldn't be anything new. But one of the things that was done early on was an NCD survey. That was a representative sample of the congregation. It wasn't everyone. But that survey gave us some good information, some good categorization of things that happened or things to understand our church situation by. And it identified 4 real vital areas that should be addressed. So here's a glimpse of that survey. If you've seen this before, this is not anything new, but the 4 of those that showed up would be empowering leadership, effective structures, holistic small groups, and loving relationships. There are a lot of ways to categorize things. Those are 4. So we had this information in mind. The church has had this information in mind, right? So in the process of then moving on to doing those 200 plus interviews, those same themes emerged. One of the challenges, one of the ways that we operated as a transition team with this information was to, okay, each of you guys are tasked with taking all the information in the report that we received and giving us the 10 things, and we call them things and themes. From those things and themes, our job was to consolidate and work this in together. So how can we understand what these are, what's related, what is similar, and how can we approach that issue or that challenge? But those 4 that you see on there were understood and seen. We also had some secret shopper surveys that took place that gave us some insights. This is that Transition Council one-on-one in-depth interviews, right? We got a report from all that. And one of the things I wanted to say about that, as we operated as a transition team, one of the things that was very important to us was to be accountable to all the words in that report. We spent the time reading every one of those answers, right? The anonymity of what was presented was preserved. We don't know who said what, but we know what was said. And we know the information that we could look at to combine and create those themes. And so I can honestly say we were faithful to that report. We didn't just come up with a plan that we already knew beforehand and now it's just been long enough we can present it. This is truly what we discerned as we prayed for God to help reveal to us what it is that we need to see. In addition, some former member and staff interviews took place, and then Pastor Jim was able to do an area demographic assessment. He's talked with other pastors in the area and so forth. So we have a pretty good basis of information to inform this direction on. Click. Okay, so here are the primary themes that were brought up, and these are going to come up one at a time. Okay, so number one theme that we were able to package together was reconciliation and conflict resolution. There are things that we as a church want to deal with or handle or put behind us so we can be better the church that God has for us to be. We'll talk more about this as we get into how this works and how we'll move forward. The second thing, I can't say the order matters. The order, we will see how it matters in a second. But the second thing we saw was empowering leadership. You see this one straight from the NCD survey. All I want to say about that right now was when we say empowering, that is different than empowered. Empowering means we are equipping the saints for effective ministry of the church. As a church, we have structures in place that help us to do and be who we need to be as a church. Third, connected relationships. One of the things that you can't see today is all the note cards with all the information. They get consolidated into this phrase, connected relationship. But there are a lot of things that this encompasses. Our fellowship, our commitment, our unity, a lot of things part of being a church to get put into this category. So you'll see it here in a second, but this connected relationships means a lot of what it means to be the church together. And 4, purpose and mission. And 5, I really can hardly separate the two because any purpose and mission would have discipleship and training at its core. But you saw it on the NCD survey, our effective, our holistic small groups is a part of it. How are we growing and equipping each other and discipling one another? But how also are we on purpose and engaged in the mission of this church in our region? Those are the 5 themes. So you're going to see those across the bottom because we're going to talk about the action steps here in a second, or some of the initiatives. But those 4, summarized by reconciliation, shepherds, relationships, on mission, and equipped, are the themes that are going to encompass the work we're talking about. So here's the master plan with that information in mind. Those 5 themes wrapping up a lot of things. We know it doesn't deal with everything that was communicated, right? But we feel like those 5 themes really do represent a good way forward. We can't address everything. We can't adjust every comment, every idea. But if we can do these things, we truly feel like we can be a church prepared to be who we need to be. All right. So from these themes, we developed a set of 4 initiatives. I'm just going to read what these are right now. I'll talk a bit about them, and then we'll talk about how they fit within those themes. But for now, the first one will be healthy relationships address the past. A thread that's going to run across the top here will be this healthy relationships. And once we can address the past, how do we protect our oneness and live together as a church body going forward? You'll see the track running on. So this first initiative should have a beginning and an end. We want to get to a point where we can say, we have addressed the past, and then help ourselves be effective at moving forward together as a church body, going forward. On another track is the empowering leadership preparation. We need to clarify how we're going to operate going forward with a leadership process, not for the sake of those leaders, but for the sake of empowering our church to be effective at ministry. And then the track going forward is how does that group and the people involved in this, and all of us as a congregation, how do we live as a church on mission and see that that is continuing to go forward? So really 2 parallel tracks. 2 of those kind of have a finite start and end. 2 of those will be ongoing initiatives that will all be a part of maintaining and keeping together as a family. How do those fit with the themes? Okay, themes are across the bottom. Really, that first theme of reconciliation and conflict resolution fits squarely in this first initiative. How can we become the church and the relationships that we need to fix or repair, or the issues we need to understand so we can move forward together? The third theme, okay, I'm looking across the top here, my bad. The third theme of relationships, ongoing, connected relationships, fits in this healthy oneness. Healthy relationships protect oneness. One of the things that we could do at the end of that would be to find a way to covenant together, to live together as a church family in a way that helps us protect this oneness. There are ways we could do this. We have this unity covenant marked on there that could take a number of shapes. But really the way we're talking about it is how can we understand what it means to not let some of the challenges that have been in our past continue again, to fix them and covenant together to maintain those relationships. That's what that first track could look like, and those really address the first and third theme. The second theme of empowering leadership fits in this track that we'll start on the bottom, and that empowering leadership preparation, right? It is what it is. At that point, I'll explain a bit more. And then our fourth and fifth theme really can emerge when we've put that in place, because the group, the cadre of elders, you'll see, I'm going to have my sheet here. One of the things I didn't do was read the mission statements of those. I'll do that here. That group will be a part of the process to making sure that we can establish a proper mission and that we are truly equipping the saints for effective ministry. So I wanted to read, I totally failed to do this before, I wanted to read the goal statement of each of those initiatives. But before I do that, I know there's a sixth one on here. This theme was kind of I want to say a sub-theme. It was more of a thread that was throughout all. We want to be transparent and clear about what we're communicating to the congregation. I hope you've felt that already, that none of this is a surprise per se of what's coming, but this will continue as we go forward. So just for a second, I want to read the goal statements of each of those initiatives. And if you have your doc, you can already read this too. But for healthy relationships, address the past. To the best of our ability, and as much as it depends on us, we will promote true restoration and the application of grace to every damaged relationship. When we talk about healthy relationships going forward, to use principles from God's word to inform a strategy to be employed by the entire congregation to protect and promote our oneness in Christ. Empowering leadership preparation. To raise up a cadre of godly servant leaders who are viewed as a spiritual asset by the congregation and who will actively shepherd the entire Northern Heights congregation, engaging as prayer shields, equipping the saints for the work of ministry, and partnering with Pastor Next. And Church on Mission, the last one here, to develop robust ministry structures and initiatives that promote fruitfulness in the making of disciples in Norfolk and beyond. This will require advancing ministry on three fronts: personal ministries, official Northern Heights ministries, and ministry partnerships with other organizations toward the accomplishment of the Great Commission. That's the goal statement of those four initiatives as it fits within the themes. How we do that is what we're working on going forward together. So I want to talk about timing of these, and then we'll talk about some of the next steps in particular. As you can imagine, timing right away, we want to be working on two fronts. One, to make sure we have clear and transparent communication in all the things. And secondly, we can begin the work now of the reconciliation and conflict resolution. We were getting some great tools and context from Pastor Jim in this sermon series, and it has already been encouraging for me to see how those messages have been received and put into use by people, both inside and outside the church. God is at work, and he uses our humility and our humbleness, our willing to make things right, to change relationships, and that's what we're praying for. That's our first step, is to dig into this area. When we get this going, we feel like then we can step and say, how do we need to get this empowering leadership preparation underway? What is it that we're trying to achieve? What are the outcomes, and how are we going to go about doing it this time and get it right so our church can be equipped to equip the saints? Likely, timing-wise, we can then get to a point where we can say we're done addressing the past. We can celebrate that, and we can find ways to move forward together. And then, depending on how the timing goes, back down here, at some point, we could install those leaders and then move forward with that set of leaders and a properly equipped church in all fronts, effective structures for equipping on all fronts to accomplish more in that area. That's the ongoing thing. But those are kind of some markers. That's likely a timeline. Where does our search for next pastor fit in here? This is important because ultimately, this is where we need to get as a church. We feel that a pastor search would be most properly handled, led by the group installed as elders in that ongoing segment. We'll get to a slide here in a second. We'll talk more about that, but that's where the pastor search would take place. At some point, we'll install our new senior pastor. There will be a bit of time between when that search ends and when it could actually happen. As you know, there's lives that are being moved, and who knows where this will come from, but there'll be a bit of time to make that happen, even if the search is complete. So that's where the pastor next fits. Who's going to do what to find our next lead pastor? So this next slide talks about a couple of quotes straight from our current set of bylaws. The elder team shall lead the appointment of lead pastor. The elder team or a committee of that team, along with congregational members they choose to assist, will form a lead pastor search team and is responsible for selecting, examining, and bringing a qualified candidate forward to the congregation for affirmation as lead pastor. The congregation's role will be a lead pastor candidate shall be recommended by the elder team and their designees and voted on by the membership whenever a vacancy occurs. The lead pastor shall be elected by ballot, requiring an affirmative vote of the membership by 2/3 of the quorum or more present at the meeting. That's the process. As you know, the 2/3 is probably the formal requirement. No pastor is going to come unless there's a higher percentage than that, most likely. But this is the process that we will use when the time is right to go about searching for and affirming a senior pastor or lead pastor, as we call it. All right, a couple other things to talk about for key assignments here. These really, I'm just going to put them all up here, represent some, that right phrase, sub-themes or other ideas that need to come from a church that is servant leader equipped. We need to promote transparency and trust and build it. We need to provide biblical instruction and healthy doctrine, and then we need to be about the process of promoting flourishing flocks and relationships. I may miss this because I haven't got these three in my brain, but an active elder team, an engaged set of shepherds. If you look at the definition here, like these are ministry assets, ministry coaches, prayer shields. That's the heart of what that means. How are they engaging and equipping the entire congregation to be effective in ministry? So I want to run through a couple of questions. That's the plan, if I go back for a second. That's the picture, the roadmap where we're going. There's a few questions that we anticipate coming from this I want to speak to before I open it up for questions. One is, why are we doing all this, right? We kind of know what we want to do. The next step is to, at some point, get to hiring a senior pastor, another one. And if you read your document, there will be some strong language in here, some direct language. Here are the problems. Here are the issues. Here are the challenges that we face. But don't be misled. There's plenty to be excited about, our opportunity and the great things that Northern Heights has going for it. But we can be and we want to be better. We're choosing to acknowledge what needs fixing or improving and then address those issues before we seek to lead our next pastor. This is exactly what this intentional interim process does. So we're not discouraged. We're being honest. We're being faithful to what we see and what we know, but we're going to make a plan to move forward in the way that God has led us. How long will this take? This is exciting and terrifying at the same time. All right, right now, we're going to start on this step one, addressing the past. By January, could we pivot to focusing on establishing leadership here? In February, could we mark the end of our process of reconciliation with a plan to move forward, protecting our oneness? Then around March, could we get to where we install those leaders and commission them to help lead us and shepherd us? That's a timeline for what this could take. Where does the next senior pastor fit into this? If you continue that timeline forward, around April, we could do the work of forming a search committee, which won't just be the elders or any of the transition team. This will be a part of the congregation. There'll be representation from across. That could happen around That could happen around April. And by fall, it's not impossible that we could have a senior pastor engaged. That's best case scenario. It might be a bit aggressive. It is true that we take a fairly methodical approach to how we go about doing things here, and that's good. We're also committed to doing this the right way. We won't be in a hurry. We'll do what it takes to do this stuff right and communicate it and have everybody on the same page. So we understand it might be a bit optimistic. Your part for this would really be to pray to help us do the things, and also to work out God's timing. One of the things we've already been praying for with whatever our pastor next is what situation is he in currently? Where is his family at? How is God already working to make this possible? What if our next senior pastor has a different vision? Okay, we're doing a fair amount of work here. Shouldn't we just wait for the next pastor to help us do this? It's a fair question. We feel that the work that we're doing right now is important for our church to understand. We need to be the church. We have a great ministry coach and pastor here to help us do these things. We need to be the church. And when another senior pastor comes in, we can hire into the vision that we've set, and then we can grow with what he has to offer as God's leading. So our next pastor must be a man who's committed to healthy relationships, whose mission centers on disciple making, who's prepared to partner with a team of men who are equipping saints for growth and fruitfulness. The way that Pastor Jim describes this is that next pastor must be a DNA fit for what we are and who we are as a church. So that's what we'll be looking for as we look to hire a senior pastor. So really that we should not have somebody with a separate vision. Obviously there'll be have a new leader and we will work that way, but these are important things. So what's next? This is really where we get to talk about how we're going to take these steps as a church. To address these 4 challenges, we're going to be developing a corresponding action plan for each. The action plan won't just be the transition team doing things. It'll be an engagement of the entire congregation in this process. But we will start with an action plan, and we're nearly finished with working this out for how we're going to address the past. Then we'll create the others as we get a bit closer. We didn't want to stop everything for that work, but our immediate work is right in front of us. Our first plan has 4 steps. First, the transition council, which is the transition team and the additional folks who helped us do the interviews, right? There's, I think, 20, right number? They are going to go about first, what relationships am I aware of that I'm involved in that I need to make right? It's going to start with that team. And once they've moved through that and been accountable to completing that work, we can then help the congregation members do the same. Our anticipation is that those folks who did the interviews, that were aware of some of the things that were reported to them in those interviews, could go and help those people do the same reconciliation. Pastor Jim said those questions today. What did I do wrong by somebody? What did somebody do wrong by me? Those are 2 questions that can help us understand what type of things we're going to hope to reconcile. And the tools with which are things that we're learning about, and many of us know, we just need a chance to do them. 3, they will promote reconciliation healing with various groups. This is an important step. There are things as a church that we are aware of that have happened, that we can identify in our past, some distant, some more recent, that have affected our congregation. We will, as a transition team and as a church, find ways to address each of those situations together. A sincere hope and prayer is that the processes that are taking place in numbers 1 and number 2 here will really facilitate any of the work that has to happen when we talk about group issues or group challenges that aren't just one-to-one. One-to-one is really my relationship with somebody. There may be times when it's a group to one or one to a group. That's what we're looking at, finding ways to identify and address. Then lastly, and this is important, we want to get to a point where we can celebrate that grace. We all won't know all the details of all these situations. But when we share at the end the things that God has done, we hope that is a great encouragement to our team, not only to find that God works and God heals, but to understand the ways in which God's working we're completely unaware of, right? We're going to celebrate that, we'll mark it, and we'll move forward as a church with, I hope, new capacity to love one another. All right, that's what's next. That's the action plan. It'll be articulated soon. Your part in this really is to begin to apply what we're learning in Pastor Jim's sermons about forgiveness, confession, forgiveness, teachability, and exhortation, right? Those are parts of it. And I'll be honest, I've been in church my whole life. It's easy to be in church. And I know what it means to do these things. It's very different for me to do them. Let's be a church that does these things. Let's fix our relationships. Let's fix the nagging problems. Let's fix our relationships so we can move together. Let's do it and be known as a church who does it and makes things right so we can be effective as we move forward. A phrase that we deal with your stuff, that's a little rough, but this is exactly what it means, right? What are you aware of? The verse talks about logs first, specks second. What are the logs that I need to to clear up so I could carefully help another deal with their specks? But if I am not willing to look first at the logs of my own eye, I will be completely unable to help. And we talk about steps 1 and 2 with the transition council and the transition team's accountability to make sure their relationships are right. That is the logs so that we can carefully help one another deal with the specks. If we cannot complete our own situations, we have a really hard time being viewed as an asset to help anybody else. And then prepare to partner with others as we address and reconcile the challenges from our past. That means something different to all of us, right? We're all aware of various things. But how can we make things right? That's our goal. That's what we have to move forward. If I could get back to the slide that showed the 4 initiatives, you have it on your sheet. Address the past, protect our oneness, empowering leadership, and then be a church on mission effectively going forward.